Okay, up next, I'm very happy to have Christopher here. I asked him to come and give us a talk because he's got experience in, well, he's from Africa and he's from Sweden. He's a multicultural kind of guy, but he's got a lot of experience in working on capacity development. And I think he's got some great stories that he can share with us about how countries can work together on some of these initiatives. So with that said, over to you, Christopher. Thank you for your presentation.
Everybody, and thank you for inviting me, an unexpected honor. Very happy to be here, make some new friends and learn quite a lot of things that maybe I've forgotten as well. When I graduated in Stockholm it's a long time ago, 1989, there was no GPS. But in my presentation, I'm not going to have a lot of slides, and I'm definitely not going to be talking about telescopes, but I hope you'll find it interesting. And the answer to the question, the meaning of life, is 42, if you've read the book. So let's start by looking at Lantmäteriet, who we are. There might be a number of you in the room that are familiar with Lantmäteriet. We are the Swedish Mapping, Cadastral and Land Registration Authority. One of the things that I think makes us quite unique is that we do all of that. We produce the maps, we do the aerial photography, we fly LiDAR, we manage the cadastre, and we also manage land registration for Sweden, which is a country of 460,000 square kilometers and a population of about 10.5 million people. We're responsible for our real property register. As I mentioned, we provide mapping, cadastral, land registration services, and we also provide updated geospatial information, which is hugely important for any society or any nation. Just some facts on Lantmäteriet. The first one might shock you. We were established in 1628 by our king at the time. So in a few years, we will be 400. It actually started earlier than that in 1523 with one of Sweden's most famous kings, Gustav Vasa, when he ascended to the throne, and Sweden as a homogeneous nation was established. So we celebrated 500 years 2 years ago. And one of the things that Gustav Vasa recognized already in 1523 was that if you knew who owned property, you could tax them. And he needed taxes to fight wars. And since then, we've progressed quite substantially. We have about 2,200 employees. 59% of them are women, 41 men. We have 50 offices. Our head office is in Gävle. Some of you might have visited. There's our annual turnover, $246 million US. 67% of that is fees and other charges. This will change because, as per the EU directive, we have to open up our spatial data. We can't charge customers any longer. And 33% of our business is financed by the Swedish government. We have over 3.6 million objects in our real property register, and they're mortgaged, as you can see, to over $732 billion US. I think the next point, and I think Nick is going to give me some scope to talk about sales and selling Geodesy, is that over and above the 246 million, which is our turnover, we generate over $1 billion US per annum in stamp duties and registration fees on properties, because we manage all property transactions and we manage all mortgages. You know, if you look at the history of Sweden, Sweden might be hard to believe today, was a very, very poor country. It was basically forestry, mining, and agriculture. It made the transition from an agrarian economy to what it is today in about 100 years, which is quite unusual. And in part, it was because we could manage land and we could manage property and we could tax it. That is what been one of the, apart from science, technology, education, collaboration between government, the private sector, academia, that has been one of the key driving factors to the development of Sweden. If we then look at our support or contribution to Swedish development, or Swedish aid, if you want to call it that. I've just done I have no idea what projection that might be. It looks quite unusual. But that's just a graphic on the number of countries that we've worked in over the years. And a brief history is that in 1979, Swede Survey was created within Lantmäteriet and started this international support work. In 93 or 94, Swede Survey was actually incorporated as a company. It no longer exists today, but that work has been continued by Lantmäteriet. And to just give some perspective on why Lantmäteriet is a contributor or assists in delivering Swedish development support, we are a handful of Swedish agencies that the government has mandated to do this. And one of the primary reasons is that in Sweden we believe that security of land ownership is one of the pillars of democracy. There are a number of other reasons as well. If you look at Swedish International Development Aid, which is managed by SIDA, I'm sure many of you are familiar with SIDA, the Swedish International Development Corporation Agency. SIDA look at aid through a number of different perspectives. Typically, it's about assisting or aiding countries that might be in a post-conflict scenario, and assisting and aiding countries to try and get their people out of poverty. So they look at it from a human rights-based approach. They look at it from a do no harm approach, and they have different thematic areas that they will consider. So democracy, human rights, and equality, which is often where the land question falls in. They look at it from a conflict mitigation or peace building perspective, and then there are a number of other perspectives as well. I think what is quite interesting is at the moment is that we can see a shift in the position from the Swedish government, where land is now moving more across into socio-economic development and not so much into democracy, human rights, and equality, which we think is good because it's a message that we preach in a lot of the countries where we are working. And I'd just like to follow on to what Ryan was saying earlier. There's definitely been quite a seismic shift in international aid or international development support. There's a shift happening in Sweden, partly because of the war in Ukraine, and Sweden is supporting Ukraine along with many other European nations. Partly because of the war in Ukraine, the decision was made for Sweden to join NATO. Sweden has always been a neutral country. Well, that's debatable in some instances. And joining NATO comes with a big price tag. So there's a reduction. We can see these reductions in aid spending coming. I think the biggest shock has been the dismantling of USAID in the space of maybe a month. And sometimes it's difficult to understand the practical implications of this. In Liberia, where I've been living and working for the last 6 years, I've lost quite a few friends that have had to leave with very short notice, chiefs of party and others from USAID. The impact for Liberia is that their programs employed about 1,500 people. And in Africa, as we well know, with extended families, if each of those persons has approximately 10 near or relatively near dependents, that is a massive impact, and it is not good. If we look at where we are currently with the projects that we're implementing, we've got Rwanda. I'm not going to read everything. I know you can all read. Serbia, which is a smart spatial data infrastructure project. Bosnia-Herzegovina, which is digital enhancement. I think I was speaking to a colleague from the Comore Islands earlier who'd been on one of the international training programs. That was actually more oceanographic. But we do run international training programs. We currently have one which is Liberia, Zimbabwe. It's been running since 2021. And we have one that was concluded recently, the RTP 311 with East African countries. I know that we're in a planning phase for another one. And then in Liberia, which is my baby, we have the development for delivery of sustainable land services. And in Mozambique, we're currently being financed by CEDA to work on a feasibility study, which will hopefully lead to a full-blown project proposal. In the African context, and as you can see, you look at most of those countries, we're talking about post-conflict scenarios. Given that Rwanda, I know the genocide was commemorated recently, it's 31 years ago. The war in Liberia finally ended in 2003. Comparing the two, it's a bit like a tale of two cities because the recovery in Liberia has been very slow. Sadly, there was the outbreak of Ebola and then followed by the pandemic. But I'd like to talk a bit about Liberia and Rwanda. And once again, I don't have a lot of slides, but I think the message that I will give tomorrow, if I'm given the bandwidth, is that when it comes to sales, apart from developing a business case, you need to be able to tell a story, and you need to be able to tell it well. And I think we have that advantage in Africa, is that we're pretty good storytellers. But just to give you some idea of the work that we have done, and if you go back historically, some of our initial projects were production projects. I think there are colleagues here from Botswana. If memory serves me correctly, I think Lantmäteriet were in Botswana for about 30 odd years, helping Botswana. Rwanda, I have a particular connection to Rwanda. That actually started, and I have my good friend Boniface that I've known since maybe 2012, and his colleague Grace are here from the National Land Authority. So it started in Rwanda with Swede Survey that did the first aerial photography, produced the orthorectified imagery for Rwanda, which kind of laid the foundation for their base map and for digitalization. And I can't go into detail, we don't have enough time on all the projects. But I got involved in Rwanda when I was at Swede Survey in 2012. We'd had one of our consultants, Leif Eliasson, who did a feasibility study in Rwanda in 2008. And I think this just gives witness to, I think, the support and the continuity in some of the work that we've done in Africa. So in 2008, Leif did a feasibility study together with, and I don't think he'd finished his PhD at the time, but together with Dr. Emmanuel Nkurunziza, who I believe is still the head of the RCMRD here in Nairobi. Then Swede Survey in a joint venture with Leica Geosystems responded to the requests for quotations. That was in 2012. We worked on that, and we won. I then left Swede Survey, and for a number of years I was the regional director for Africa for Leica Geosystems. So I actually had the privilege of leading the team that built a Rwanda near GeoNet in Rwanda. That was officially launched in 2016. And since then, our project has provided and is still providing support to Rwanda GeoNet. The network has been densified. I think Boniface can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there are now 10 stations that are all up and running. So I think there's a success story in that itself. If we look at Liberia, and as I said, I've been there now for 6 years since late 2019, and I was very happy to meet my colleague Ferdinand, who's our neighbor to the south in Cote d'Ivoire. And there's Mr. Sama, who's not in the room at the moment, who's our neighbor to the north in Sierra Leone, where they're implementing quite a substantial World Bank project. Rwanda, and this might shock you, I don't know how much you know about, not Rwanda, sorry, Liberia. I don't know much you know about Liberia, and I won't go into all the historical aspects of Liberia, but we went into Liberia. We've already completed a 5-year project from 2019 to 2023. It was capacity building. It was called the Inclusive Land Administration Management Project. And you go into these projects and you design these projects and you make certain assumptions. Some of those assumptions turn out to be untrue. The one assumption that had a huge impact that did turn out to be untrue was the amount of support the government of Liberia could give to the Liberia Land Authority, which in effect was zero. And since the war ended in 2003, the first African woman president, Madam Sirleaf Johnson, had a large focus on land. So they went through quite a lengthy process. In 2018, the Land Rights Act was passed in Liberia. Prior to 2018, women couldn't own land in Liberia. In fact, women were generally regarded as assets. That was a long process in itself. You might not know this about Liberia, but it is one of the poorest countries in the world, which is obviously why we're there. The majority of our population in Liberia survive on about $1 a day. The illiteracy rate is about 47%. In women, it's even higher. It's close to 70. And this makes communication and awareness around land rights and women's land rights extremely difficult, because you can't be sending out mass mails. A lot of people just cannot read and write. I was in a discussion earlier with some colleagues from Malawi. I mean, what we've tested that's worked really well is radio. It's the medium that works the best. So there are these challenges that are faced. The government of Liberia is extremely constrained in terms of their fiscal position. And to talk about geodesy in Liberia, you could literally be on another planet. And it becomes challenging when you're implementing a project. And I think, just to give you some, I can't go into all the details, but to give you some practical examples, you know, we're busy trying to develop the Liberia Land Authority that was established in 2016, and they're an amalgamation of people and functions that came from other ministries that were trying to manage land in Liberia. There is no geodetic network in Liberia. Well, there was one built by the US Army Engineers Corps. A lot of it got destroyed during the war. The positive is that during the World Bank project, there have been a number of projects running in Liberia. IG in France, Ferdinand's old teacher, Cyril Romier, as part of the project came in, they did a campaign, they densified the network. So we have 13 survey points in Monrovia, and we have one in each of the 15 counties in Liberia. We also have one cause station in Monrovia. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is about it. There is very little to zero geospatial information. We have sorted, catalogued, and taken hard copy maps back to Sweden, where we've scanned them, because we can do that, to give us some base layers in the land administration system that we're busy building. We have I think it's quite a unique situation in Liberia. We have title deeds, hard copy title deeds. At one point, there was an initiative funded by USAID to scan these and put them in a system called Open Title. Unfortunately, due to lack of finance and lack of maintenance, the servers crashed, the system fell over, and it was lost. We managed to, it's a bit of an Indiana Jones story I was telling Ferdinand during the coffee break. We've managed to find the original database, and we've recovered about 50% of what there was. The rest is in the wind. But you presented with some very unique challenges. For example, I learned, and I was surprised, to say the least. In Liberia, you can graduate from high school, you can graduate with a bachelor's degree, you can even graduate with a master's degree, but you don't know how to use a computer, because everything you submit is handwritten, and I mustn't laugh, but it does present some unique challenges implementing a project when you spend. And what we contribute from Sweden and Lantmäteriet is, in terms of the inputs, is finance, skills, expertise, etc. But when you train the customer service department on customer service, and then you buy them computers so that they can do their job, only to discover that they can't use a computer, then you've got to go back a few steps and provide basic IT training so that they can use a computer. So these are some of the very unique challenges in Liberia. And one of my favorite sayings is that challenges make life interesting, overcoming them makes life meaningful. Another good example in Liberia is we trained for the first year jointly with the bank project. We trained 20 survey technicians, 13 ladies and 7 men, although one of the men defected on a study visit to Sweden and he's never been seen again. He might be playing football in Europe, I don't know. Yeah. We've had a few people defect in Sweden. There were another 2 that were on the RTP that also disappeared. But you know, so 19 of these candidates graduated. Simultaneously, we funded the reconstitution of the surveying licensing registration board so that we could actually have registered surveyors in Liberia. One of the big challenges in Liberia, which contributes to conflict, there's still, not on a daily basis, but there's still people getting killed in Liberia over land disputes. I'm not talking about in the bush, I'm talking about in the peri-urban and urban areas of Monrovia. And the problem is the lack of information. And underlying, I'm not going to talk about it, is Geodesy. You know, there are fake deeds. There are, it is a complete mess. When we then, once we'd reconstituted the Surveyors Licensing Registration Board, our students, and then there were a number of others that could sit the board exam from private survey companies, so there were 40 in total. At that graduation ceremony at the end of 2022, those 40 people increased the number of licensed land surveyors in Liberia by 50%. So that was, you know, when you look at our projects and you look at what CEDA expects, they want to see change. They want to see significant change, and they preferably want to see change that is also going to benefit the poor people of Liberia. If we move on to where we are currently in our what we call SLSL, Sustainable Land Services in Liberia, or to be more mathematic, SL squared, which confuses quite a lot of people. We've shifted focus from our last project, and actually we started pivoting our last project after the pandemic. I think it was Ryan who mentioned, you know, instead of giving people fish, teach them how to fish. We also realized that we were building capacity and training people, but if you're training survey technicians and they've got no instrumentation, what is the purpose of building capacity? Fortunately, with CEDA and the way CEDA works, they love what's known as adaptive management. So we have the flexibility in our projects to adapt. So our philosophy in Liberia has always been we need to find local solutions for local challenges. And fortunately, as the project manager, I have that flexibility to decide we need to spend some money on equipment, which typically we don't do a lot in our projects. And that's why the World Bank project was very beneficial, because they actually could spend money on a cause, on buying equipment, on renovating the head office. We can't do that, but we do have a certain amount of leeway to adapt the project, because CEDA see it as being a learning process, not only for us as implementers, but even for the authority that we're trying to build. So we could adapt. And what we're focusing on now, which we already started, and progress is slow in Liberia, and I'm sure you can understand some of the reasons why it's slow. We've now focused a lot more on decentralization. So decentralizing the services in Monrovia to the counties in Liberia, to their county land offices, where we've spent money. The bank renovated some of these offices. We've chosen counties where there's a potential for revenue generation. We equipped the offices, we've put in solar panels, we've bought motorbikes, we've done a lot of training. So decentralization is important, because it's actually taking the services to the people and not requiring Liberian citizens to travel to Monrovia to transact on a land transaction. So we're supporting the decentralization, and then the focus is also on increased revenue generation. Getting back to my first point, the amount of money that Lantmäteriet generates, over $1 billion US per year in stamp duties. And revenue generation is connected to sustainability, because we know for a fact that the budgetary allocation that the Liberia Land Authority gets from the government of Liberia is about $1.6 million US. 93% of that goes to salaries. So you have a government that expects a land authority to sustain its operational costs on 7% of 1.6 million. It is totally impossible. And without the support, and we are now the only ones providing support, but without the support, it would be very difficult to move forward in Liberia. So, and the sustainability aspect comes in. At some point in time, Lantmäteriet and Sweden might not be there. We cannot leave Liberia one day and within 6 months to a year or 2 years, everything falls over. And from my experience in Africa and just talking to the colleague from Ethiopia, maintenance is a huge issue. You can build a system, it doesn't matter what system, we can be talking about cores, we can be talking about land administration management systems. If you can't fund the maintenance and keep it operational, at some point it will break down. And that is what we want to desperately try and avoid in Liberia. So our current focus is a lot around the decentralization and increased revenue generation. And fortunately, we're now getting better traction. Getting government ministries to talk to each other in Liberia is a challenge. We can leverage the fact that we are funding the activities. So we're now in a position where, fortunately, the Land Authority and the Liberia Revenue Authority are starting to talk to each other around property valuation. And that is, you read quite a lot about it nowadays, where there's a lot of focus on the terminology is domestic tax revenue generation. Sometimes, unfortunately, they forget about property. And once again, going back to my example in Sweden, you know, the property taxes in Liberia, up until quite recently, paying property tax was voluntary. Now they're having to put the hammer down because they have to generate money, especially when you're suddenly facing a fiscal position where maybe $50 million US from USAID is gone. So this is a good thing. I see it as an ability for us to leverage that to advance both the Liberia Land Authority and also to advance Liberia, because they need to start generating more tax out of property. There are also two sides to the coin. In Liberia, we look at it holistically. On the one hand, trying to develop a transparent, well-governed authority where the citizens of Liberia actually trust them and trust that their title deed is valid, so that they have security of tenure. On the other hand, 2/3 of Liberia, which is 110,000 square kilometers, is what's known as customary land. It's land that during the administration up until the time of the military coup in 1979, they regarded the indigenous people of Liberia as just being the custodians of the land. The Land Rights Act in 2018 was quite progressive because it gives communities the ability to own land. So there's a formalization process that's going on, which has also been slow. And at the moment, we have plus minus 45 communities that have been formalized. They now have title deed to their land, so they own their lands communally. This also contributes to the opportunity for socio-economic development, because Liberia, I'm not sure about how common this is in other African countries, they've had this concept of concessions, where the government in Monrovia will give a concession to a company to typically grow palm oil. The best example is probably Firestone Rubber Plantation. I think they've had that concession in place for about 100 years. Hopefully now, these customary communities that now own their land, there's going to be a learning process that's going to have to be put in place as well, will be able to directly negotiate with investors that are interested in either agriculture or mining in Liberia. I've got a few minutes left. I think just a reflection on the aid initiatives in Liberia, and I don't want to be overly critical. by the time we get to the end of the current project, there might well be a new phase. We don't know yet. That depends on how decisions are made at a government level in Sweden and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We will have spent $10 million in Liberia. The bank project was $5 million. USAID conservatively have spent between 60 and 70 million. Progress has been very slow, but when you think about it, just the amount of money spent on legal fees to promulgate the Land Rights Act was substantial. There have been other initiatives that have, unfortunately, like the open title property solution that fell over. But at Lantmäteriet, when we do projects, our focus is on significant change, sustainable change, and also on actually implementation. And I haven't been in this sector for all that long. It's been more private sector. But when you went back historically and you started reading these consultant reports, and that's what a lot of money is spent on, to bring in a consultant, to do an analysis and write a report with recommendations. When you have a nascent land authority that's not as mature as many of your authorities in this room, to give somebody a report with recommendations and expect they're going to implement it with no funding from their own government, it doesn't work. One of the first documents I read when I got to Liberia was a 5-year strategic plan for the Liberia Land Authority. I showed it to our senior leadership management team at Lantmäteriet, and they looked at it and they laughed and they said, if somebody gave this to us, we couldn't do this in 5 years in Sweden. So, a consultant that is charged a lot of money to deliver a 5-year strategic plan, which is just absolutely impossible for my colleagues at the Land Authority to implement, that's where a lot of money's gone to. So there has been a lot of wastage. Progress is very slow. But as I said to somebody earlier, the old African proverb, how do you eat an elephant? In very small pieces. I think my 30 minutes are up. What I'd just like to say to conclude, and I'm not looking for free beers this evening, but I've been in this geospatial industry for quite a long time. And I must say that Nick and Ryan and Wala and their team, what they've put together here, I don't think I've ever seen anything like it. It's quite exceptional. The body of knowledge, I can just understand the amount of work that must have gone in to putting together the material that's been given to everybody here today is quite amazing. There is an opportunity for some questions and reflections, if you like.
Yeah, please. Thanks for the talk. I love the history and trying to understand. I think you've done a great deal of work when you've been in these positions to understand why are they in this situation to start with. That why is really important, and then you're using that information to try and improve things. You're not just trying to look for quick fixes, and I think that message really came through. So thank you. We do have a couple of minutes. We have about 5 or 6 minutes for a few questions, if anyone has any for Chris or any reflections, as you said. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that wonderful presentation. I only have one question. It's regarding the scanning of cadastral diagram, if I may call it that. I just want to find out if there are coordinates on those, because past experiences tell us that when you scan, you introduce more errors. And I think the best, if there are coordinates, the best is to actually capture by coordinate, since you mentioned that people are actually killing each other over property disputes. And as a surveyor, if there are coordinates, how comes the coordinates? I just wanted to find out.
Thank you. Actually, I forgot to mention that I got carried away. So another unique challenge, and I was telling Fernando about this. Another unique challenge that we have in Liberia, when it comes to property ownership, illegal land sales, is that on the title deeds, on the survey diagrams, there are no coordinates. It's been measured by compass bearing and distance. Of course, and they're not georeferenced. So this is a problem. And we actually did a few of us did a small paper that we presented at the FIG in Orlando. And we spoke to quite a few people there, some of my former colleagues from Esri, some people from Saudi Arabia, from Holland, from Singapore. We were hoping to be able to leverage AI to try and look at these and look at some of the street names and help us to patch together. But everybody said, not at the moment. So it's a huge challenge. I mean, I think it's the old case of there's that which is desirable and that which is achievable. We can't at the moment fix the historical aspect. There are some initiatives underway now, in part with this land administration system that we're bringing, that we're building, that we're going to go on a campaign, because part of the process of registering title deed in Liberia, once it's probated in the court, which for us in Sweden is quite unusual, because in Sweden the courts aren't involved in property registration. We do it, Lantmäteriet. But some people go and get their deed probated, but they don't come and register it. So we're going to go on a campaign now to ask citizens to bring their title deeds and to actually show us on the map where the property is. So once again, as we say in Liberia, it's small. But we got to start somewhere. We can't address the historical aspects, but you're right. I mean, in terms of the scanning, we're only going to use this as a kind of a base layer in the system, because it does have some interesting historical relevant information, particularly in terms of clan boundaries and other information. So yeah, I know there's a lot of other initiatives. I mean, we're trying to leverage technology and leapfrog. So we're starting to use remote piloted aircraft systems. There's an organization some of you might be familiar with called place.org. We're gonna test that. If we did have, once again, that which is desirable, that which is achievable, if we had unlimited funding, we could probably fix a lot of things a lot faster, but unfortunately we don't.
I've got a question, but just a general reaction to your talk. It's both encouraging and depressing. And I mean, from what the background you gave about what you've been involved in supporting development of information system, I think Zambia was a beneficiary from CEDA, Sweet Survey. Just to what you've described in terms of the challenges in Liberia, it seems just like overwhelming that you can be depressed and just lose energy to do anything. So I really commend you for sticking it out and sustaining the hope in such a very difficult situation. Yeah, we complain about a lot of things in Zambia about our land management system and Geodesy and the like, but that picture is really quite concerning. Yeah, one thing that struck me was on the data that was lost, the digital data that was lost. I think we had a similar experience, but not maybe at that level in Zambia. The first information system was started, I think, through the support of Sweden, and it's been going through a number of revisions. And in the latest one, there was some data lost. Now, what I'm wondering is, are we moving too fast in Africa in terms of digitalization, that we are not yet ready to have a backup system to protect precious information? Or what do you think is, what's the advice? Because it's like we transition to digital without taking very good care of the remaining hard copies and other systems. Sometimes we go completely digital and then things crash and no backup. and precious information is lost? Are we moving too fast? What's the advice?
So firstly, I mean, thanks for your comments. I think, I mean, what I find inspirational is the people that I work with at the Land Authority, where, you know, a survey technician is maybe earning $250 a month. Sometimes civil servants in Liberia don't get paid at the end of the month. They only get paid much later. In terms of digitalization, I think, you know, technology which we're trying in Liberia actually allows us in Africa to leapfrog, and I think we have to leverage it. If you look at the pace with which technology and everything else is developing, I don't think we can be fast enough. I think, but fundamentally, you know, in terms of ICT and IT policy, it is crucial. It is, I mean, it's like the golden rule. You have to back up your data, because your last backup is only good as good as your first database failure, because that's when you suddenly realize, damn, we missed the backup. And that's it. You have to find a disaster recovery solution so that you can secure your data. Nick said it was a minute, so that's my message.
All right, thank you very much, everybody. That brings us to a close for today. Please join me again in thanking our great presenters this afternoon, Christopher and Annalette. Thank you. Really appreciate those insights. I hope you had another wonderful day. I hope your heads are full of information. So go home, get some good sleep, get some good rest. And I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow, and we'll start at 9 o'clock in the morning. Thanks, everybody. And thanks again to our magnificent interpreters for your great job today.